My name is Madison Clark, and at 29 years old, I finally achieved the dream I had spent years building toward. The house wasn't just a property. It was every overtime shift, every sacrifice, every weekend I spent working while others relaxed. It was years of discipline wrapped in white stone walls overlooking a quiet lake, and I bought it without telling anyone, especially my family. At the time, I thought secrecy would protect my dream. I was wrong. 3 days after closing, I received a call from a neighbor. "Madison," he said carefully, "I think you should check your security cameras. There are people inside your house." My stomach dropped. I opened the camera app, the screen filled with images I couldn't understand at first. Balloons, food, music, laughter. Then I saw them. My brother, his wife, their children, and several relatives. They weren't visiting. They were celebrating inside my home. My brother stood in the center of the living room, smiling as though he owned the place. His wife moved comfortably through the kitchen. Their children ran through rooms I hadn't even had the chance to enjoy myself. For a moment, I simply stared. Years of sacrifice flashed through my mind. Every paycheck, every sleepless night, every goal postponed. And somehow they had stepped into the reward as if it belonged to them. That was the moment I realized something important. This wasn't confusion. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was entitlement. And entitlement only grows when it's never challenged. I contacted local authorities and drove straight to the property. By the time I arrived, my heart was racing. The celebration was still going. The laughter was still echoing through the house. But reality was about to arrive too. When officers requested proof of ownership, my brother suddenly became uncomfortable. The confidence disappeared. The stories changed. The explanations shifted. Then I stepped forward with the documents. The deed, the mortgage papers, every record showing exactly who had purchased the property. Me. The silence that followed felt louder than any argument. For years, my family had treated my accomplishments as community property. My success was expected to be shared. My boundaries were expected to disappear. My dreams were expected to make room for everyone else's. But this time was different. The paperwork didn't care about family narratives. The truth was clear. The house belonged to me. When everyone finally left, I stood alone in the living room. The house was quiet, but my mind wasn't, because deep down I knew this wasn't really about a building. It never had been. It was about a pattern that had followed me since childhood. My brother was always the center of attention. His mistakes were excused. His wants became family priorities. And whenever I succeeded, there seemed to be an expectation that I should share the reward. For years, I convinced myself that keeping the peace was worth it. But standing inside that house, I finally asked myself a question. What had keeping the peace actually cost me? The answer was painful. It had cost me confidence. It had cost me boundaries. And sometimes it had even cost me my voice. The days that followed were difficult. Phone calls arrived nonstop. Relatives questioned my decision. Family members suggested I was overreacting. Some even implied that owning a home meant I had a responsibility to accommodate everyone else's expectations. I listened. Then I did something I had rarely done before. I trusted myself. Instead of arguing, I focused on facts. I organized documents, saved messages, collected records. Not because I wanted conflict, but because I wanted clarity. And clarity has a way of exposing stories that were never true to begin with. As more evidence surfaced, the narrative started changing. People who had initially believed rumors began asking questions. The version of events they had heard no longer matched reality. For the first time, I wasn't defending myself emotionally. I was simply standing in the truth. And truth is surprisingly powerful. A week later, my brother requested a private meeting. He arrived with the same confidence I had seen on the camera footage. At first, he spoke calmly. He said the house was too large for one person. He suggested it should become a shared family space. He framed the proposal as fairness, but beneath every sentence was the same message. Your success belongs to everyone except you. Years earlier, I might have agreed. Years earlier, I might have felt guilty. Years earlier, I might have sacrificed my own happiness to avoid disappointing people. Not anymore. I looked across the table and realized something. The person sitting in front of me wasn't asking for partnership. He was asking for ownership of something he hadn't built. And those are very different things. For the first time in my life, I said no without apologizing. No explanations, no guilt, no negotiation, just a boundary. Simple, clear, necessary. The conversation ended quickly after that. And although it hurt, it also felt strangely freeing. Because every healthy boundary disappoints someone who benefited from your lack of one. Over the next several weeks, the situation continued to unfold. Posts appeared online. Stories circulated among relatives. Opinions spread faster than facts. But something inside me had changed. I stopped chasing approval. I stopped trying to convince everyone to understand, and most importantly, I stopped measuring my worth through other people's acceptance. That shift transformed everything. I focused on my career. I invested in my future. I furnished my home room by room. Each small improvement felt meaningful. Not because of the furniture, not because of the property, but because every choice reflected a life I was finally building for myself. One evening, I stood on the back porch, watching the sunset ripple across the lake. The water reflected golden-orange light. The breeze carried the scent of fresh grass. For the first time in months, I felt calm. A neighbor walked by and paused. "You know," he said, "most people would have given in." I smiled. Maybe he was right. The old version of me probably would have. But growth often begins where people stop recognizing the role they've assigned you. That house became more than a dream fulfilled. It became evidence that I could choose myself, not at the expense of others, but without abandoning myself for them. Eventually, the pressure faded. The calls became less frequent. The arguments lost momentum. The expectations weakened. And slowly, silence returned. But this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't loneliness. It was peace. One evening, I walked through the house after finishing work. The living room glowed softly under warm lights. The kitchen smelled like fresh coffee. The walls no longer felt empty. They felt like home. As I moved from room to room, I thought about the journey that had brought me there. The dream wasn't really the house. The dream was becoming someone who believed she deserved it. Someone who could celebrate her own success without asking permission. Someone who understood that boundaries are not acts of rejection. They're acts of self-respect. My family taught me many lessons. Some came from love, others came from disappointment. But the most valuable lesson emerged from this entire experience. You cannot build a peaceful future while constantly surrendering your present. Sometimes growth requires difficult conversations. Sometimes healing requires distance. And sometimes success requires protecting what you've worked hard to create. Today, when I pull into the driveway, I don't think about the conflict anymore. I think about the person who refused to give up. The person who kept working when progress felt impossible. The person who learned that self-worth doesn't come from approval. It comes from honoring your own value. The key still rests in my hand every evening when I unlock the front door. A simple piece of metal, yet it reminds me of something much bigger. The house represents more than achievement. It represents freedom. The freedom to choose my own future, the freedom to protect my peace, and the freedom to finally write my own story. Because in the end, the greatest thing I gained wasn't a dream home. It was the confidence to believe that my dreams belong to me.